Wyoming Territory, June 1878. The wind cut low across the open plains, dry and mean as judgment, when Prudence Ellison was cast out with her baby in her arms and nowhere to go. The door to her father's house slammed behind her like a verdict. She did not look back. Her arms ached from holding little Florence, just shy of 1 year, as she walked down the dirt road that led away from the Ellison ranch. Dust clung to her skirt, and her boots, worn too thin, let in the sharp edges of gravel. She had nothing but a canvas bag with a change of clothes, a tin of powdered milk, and the baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket her mother had sewn before she passed. "You bring shame to this family. I will not have a bastard child under my roof," her father had told her. "You made your bed, girl. Lie in it." So she did. On the cold ground that night, under a crooked pine tree near the river, with Florence curled against her chest and her ribs aching from a hunger she would not feed until the baby was full. She had not seen the father of her child since the day he rode off, promising to send for her. He never did. By the next morning, she was in the town of Emigrant Gulch, a mining town turned cattle stop, where the sun baked the dirt roads and men looked too long at anything female. She kept her chin down and tried to find work. The mercantile offered her half pay and a cot in the back if she cleaned shelves and helped with stock. It was enough to keep Florence fed, nothing more. A month passed. Then 2. She came to know the hours by the sound of horses outside, the quiet lull of Florence's breathing beside her at night, and the way her own hands cracked from scrubbing floors. Then he walked in. He was tall not in a brash way, but in a way that made him seem like he belonged to the land. Sun-brown skin, dark blonde hair under a wide-brimmed hat, and eyes the color of dry wheat. He wore his coat open, dust still clinging to it from the road, and he walked like a man who knew what he stood for. "Need a new bridle," he said, voice low, steady. Prudence kept her head down behind the counter. Second shelf back, left side. He found it paid and turned to leave, then paused. "You from around here?" he asked. "No," she said. "Just passing through." He glanced at the baby in the cradle beside her. "That your little one?" She nodded, jaw tight. She waited for the judgment. Most men offered that look pity or scorn, sometimes both, but this man just said, "She looks like she likes this town better than you do." Prudence did not answer. He nodded once, then left. She did not expect to see him again, but he came back the next day. And the next. Always for something small: nails, rope, flour, always asking questions gently, like he was trying not to step on a sore spot. "You got a name?" he finally asked one afternoon, leaning his elbows on the counter like he belonged there. "Prudence," she said, and added, "Ellison," he nodded. "Silas Boone." That night she said his name out loud to Florence as she rocked her to sleep. Silas Boone. Sounds like he was born on a horse. Each visit after that, he stayed longer. He made Florence laugh once with a silly face and gave her a tiny carved horse he said he had whittled from scrap wood. "Why are you being kind to us?" Prudence asked one day when he helped carry a sack of grain in for her. He shrugged. "You look like you could use someone not trying to take something from you." She did not answer, but her eyes burned as she looked away. Then came the trouble. One afternoon, the town's blacksmith, a loud man named Will Myers, cornered her behind the store when she stepped out to dump old stock. He reeked of whiskey. "You think you're better than the rest of the girls around here just because you got a baby," he slurred. "I seen the way Silas looks at you. You think he's gonna play house with some ruined woman." Prudence tried to push past him, but he grabbed her arm. "I said, you need to let go of her." Silas's voice cut through the air like a whip. Will turned, already sneering. "This ain't your business, Boone." "It is now." Silas stepped closer, eyes steady, hands loose at his sides. "We'll let go, but not before sneering. You gonna play hero for the town's whore, Boone? That what you're doing?" Silas hit him. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to silence him. Will fell back, stunned more by the audacity than the pain. Silas turned to Prudence. "You all right?" She nodded, clutching Florence, heart pounding. "You should not have done that." "I do not care," word spread by nightfall. That Silas Boone had bloodied a man over the woman with the bastard child, that he had made his side known. By morning, the saloon doors did not swing open for him. The ranchers he rode with stopped tipping their hats, and still he came. When Prudence told him he was ruining his name, he said, then let it be ruined. I would not want the kind of name that cannot stand beside you." She stared at him, silent, unsure what to do with the way her chest tightened when he said it. That night, he showed up at the back of the mercantile again, this time with a bundle under one arm, fresh bread, dried meat, a wool blanket. "For you and Florence," he said, setting it down. "You do not owe us anything," she said softly. "I know," he said. "But I want to." She looked at him, then really looked. He was not trying to rescue her. He was choosing her, all of her. The hard parts included. Florence reached toward him from her cradle, tiny hand open. Silas smiled and took her fingers gently in his. Prudence whispered, "You are not afraid of what people think." He looked at her, eyes steady and warm. "I am afraid of letting you think you are alone." And in that moment, in the quiet, in the dark, she felt something shift. Hope, maybe, or something close to it. She reached out and laid her hand on his, not as thanks, but as a beginning. Silas came less often after that night. Not because he'd pulled away, rather, he returned to his work further north, tending a spread near the Powder River, where the grass grew high and summer storms came sudden. He rode into town only once or twice a week now, always near sundown when the mercantile was quiet and Florence had gone down for the night. Prudence watched the road without meaning to, her hands busy with inventory or folding muslin, but her ears tuned to hoofbeats. When they came, her shoulders eased in a way she didn't let herself name. One evening, Silas arrived with his coat damp and his hat pulled low. A storm had passed through, leaving his hair soaked and the scent of rain clinging to his clothes. "You're wet through," she said, closing the storeroom door behind them. "Rode through a creek bed that decided it was a river," he said, setting his gloves on the crate beside her. "Didn't want to wait another day." She gave him a dry towel and watched him scrub at his face and neck. His hands were rough, but his touch always seemed careful, like he'd learned early how to handle breakable things. "You sleep all right lately?" he asked, setting the towel aside. "Some," she said. "Florence's cutting teeth again. Cries more at night. She settled for rocking, most times." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed now. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She looked at him sharply. "You mean run?" "No, not run, start over. Somewhere that doesn't remember your name." Prudence sat on the edge of the workbench and picked at a splinter in the grain. "I don't have the means to go anywhere, and I don't know where I'd be welcome." Silas didn't speak right away. He watched her with a stillness that made her nervous, but not in a way that made her want to step back. It was the kind that made her want to be honest. "My uncle's ranch near Buffalo has a spare cabin," he said. "Nobody lives in it now, needs fixing, but it's solid, got a roof and a stove. I could help you get it cleaned up." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He met her eyes. "Because I want something good to come out of all this, and because I'd sleep better knowing you weren't spending another winter behind a storeroom wall." Prudence felt her throat tighten. "That's a long way from here. Less than 3 days' ride," he said. "I'll haul the wagon." She didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands, then at the small curtain that led to the cot where Florence slept. The idea of leaving the risk of it twisted in her chest. But so did the thought of staying. "I'd need to keep working," she said. "I'm not asking for charity. There's a post office up that way and a schoolhouse. They need help. You could earn your keep easy." She nodded slowly, then glanced up at him. "You'd be nearby. I work cattle across his land most seasons. I'd be close." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't empty. He wasn't pressing her, just standing still, letting her weigh it in her own time. "Finally," she said, "I'd need a few days to settle things here. Let Mr. Tulliver know I'm going." "I'll come back Friday," he said. "If you're ready, we'll go." After he left, she sat alone at the counter, Florence stirring behind the curtain. The wind had shifted outside, and the air smelled like sage burned clean by rain. On Thursday, she packed only what mattered. The blanket her mother made, 3 dresses, the carved horse Silas had given Florence, a photograph of her mother holding her as a baby, the corners worn soft. Friday morning came with clear skies, the sun low and warm. Silas arrived with a wagon hitched and supplies loaded, tools, bedding, a straw mattress rolled tight. Prudence stood at the back door, Florence on her hip, a satchel at her feet. "You sure?" he asked, his voice low. She stepped down beside him. "I am." They rode out slow, the wagon creaking beneath them, Florence curled in the crook of her lap. The prairie opened wide ahead, hills rolling like soft waves. Neither of them said much, but the silences felt different now, like something unfolding instead of something closing in. That night, they camped near a shallow creek. Silas built a fire and cooked beans while Prudence laid Florence down in a bed of blankets. She watched the light flicker across his face as he worked, quiet and focused. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked, surprising herself. He looked up, not startled, just thoughtful. "I have." "What stopped you?" He stirred the beans once more. "Never found someone who felt like home." She didn't answer, not out of fear, but because the words settled deep inside her. When the fire died low and the stars stretched sharp over the plains, she lay beside Florence with Silas just a few feet away, his back to her, his breath steady. She listened to the quiet between them and knew, for the first time in a long while, that she was moving towards something instead of away from it. And in that space between sleep and waking, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin stood on a rise above a cottonwood draw, its roof bowed slightly under years of snow, one shutter hanging crooked. But it was dry inside, and the hearth drew smoke clean. Silas set a fire before they unloaded the wagon, coaxing warmth into the air while Prudence walked the small space, Florence balanced on her hip, eyes wide. There were 2 rooms, one bare but for an old frame bed and wooden chest, the other a kitchen with a table and iron stove. A low shelf held jars of preserves, dusted over but sealed tight. Silas pulled his hat off, ran a hand through his hair and said, "Ain't much, but it's yours now." Prudence looked at the worn floorboards, the chipped enamel basin, the single window turned west. "It feels like somewhere a person could breathe." They spent that first day cleaning. Silas worked without pause, patching the shutter with cedar boards, clearing fallen branches from the lean to out back. Prudence scrubbed the shelves, boiled water for the mattress ticking, and showed Florence how to chase sunlight across the floor. By dusk, the cabin smelled of lye, wood smoke, and stew. Silas had hunted a rabbit earlier, and now it simmered with onions and thyme from a tin he'd brought. They ate in quiet, Florence perched on a folded towel beside them, fists sticky with bread. Afterward, Silas stepped outside to see to the horses. Prudence washed the dishes, sleeves rolled high, and watched him through the window as he moved between saddle and stirrup, his posture easy, the kind earned from years working alone. When he returned, he leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You ever keep chickens?" "Not since I was a girl," she said, drying her hands. "We had 6. I named each after a hymn." He shook his head, a low laugh in his chest. "That's so," she met his eyes. "You ever name a horse after a hymn?" "No, ma'am. But I had a mule once I called Hallelujah, on account of how stubborn she was." That night, Prudence laid Florence in the bed and tucked the blanket to her chin. The girl turned once, then fell into sleep with her thumb against her cheek. Prudence stepped out into the main room where Silas sat by the fire, a stack of kindling in his lap. "She settled?" he asked. "She always does, eventually." He nodded, feeding a stick to the flame. "There's a man west of here, homesteader with a sawmill. I could make a trade for lumber. Build you a coop, get you started." "I can pay for the lumber," she said, sitting across from him. "I'm not offering it as charity." "I know," she said simply, "but I want to stand my own ground." He watched her over the firelight. "You do?" They sat without speaking for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. He sliced a piece of dried apple and handed it to her. She took it, their fingers brushing. It lingered between them, not the touch, but the permission of it. "I used to think," she said, "that if I admitted I was lonely, it meant I'd failed somehow." He shifted slightly. "You didn't fail." She looked down at the apple in her hand. "No, but I let myself believe I had." Silas stood and crossed to the hearth, setting another log on the fire. "You were doing what you had to do." "I was surviving," she said. "I didn't know that could feel like drowning." He turned back toward her. "You're not alone now," she met his gaze. "I'm still learning what that means." The fire cracked low. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, soft and steady. Florence stirred once behind the door but didn't wake. Silas stepped closer and held out his hand. She didn't ask why. She took it and rose, letting him guide her to the doorway. The night opened wide before them, stars sharp, sky deep. He didn't wrap his arm around her. He didn't speak promises. But he stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, and she felt something anchor. "Do you think," she asked, voice low, "this could be a life?" He looked out over the dark land, then down at her. "I think it already is." She turned her face toward him, the wind lifting her hair. He reached up and tucked a strand behind her ear, not rushed, not hesitant. This time when she leaned into him, it wasn't out of need or fear. It was choice. It was trust hard-earned. She rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, careful not to press too tight. They stayed like that until the cold deepened, and the fire inside beckoned them back. When they lay down for the night Florence between them, warm and dreaming Prudence felt the last of the winter inside her begin to thaw, and she did not feel cast out anymore. She felt chosen. The first snow came early late September, brittle flakes drifting across the pasture like ash. Silas had spent the morning splitting pine rounds behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, breath thick in the cold. Prudence was inside, stitching a patch into the elbow of his shirt while Florence napped in a wooden cradle he'd built from leftover fence rails. He stepped inside with his arms full, boots scattering snow near the hearth. "We'll need to stack a second row before the week's out," he said. The wind's shifting sharp off the bighorns. Prudence didn't look up from her thread. "I'll help after supper." Silas set the wood down and leaned against the doorframe, watching her fingers move. "Don't rush that stitch. It's already held longer than the shirt deserves." She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed on the fabric. "You tear through sleeves the way Florence tears through apples." "She got that from me then." Her hand paused. "No, she didn't." Silas shifted his weight but didn't speak. He'd never asked about the man who left her, never needed to. But now, as the fire crackled low and the snow tapped the window in uneven rhythm, Prudence set the shirt aside and said, "He was a cattle runner. Passed through the Ellison land 3 springs back, said he'd write." Silas waited. "He didn't," she went on, "and I didn't expect him to. I think I just wanted to believe in the kind of man who would." She looked up then, and her voice was steady. "I don't mistake you for him. I see you plain, Silas." He crossed the space between them. "How do you see me?" She folded the shirt. "Like a man who doesn't say more than he means, and means everything he says." He nodded, took the shirt gently from her hands, and knelt to set it beside the cradle. "I had a brother once," he said. "Younger. Taught him to ride, to hold a fence line steady. He was 18 when a bull broke through the corral and threw him. Didn't live out the week." Prudence's breath caught. She hadn't known. Silas kept his eyes on the cradle. "After that, I stopped looking for anything that could be taken away. Figured if I didn't get close, I wouldn't get hollowed out again." He turned to her then. "But you make me want things again." They stood for a moment in the hush of the room, the firelight playing across the walls. Florence stirred once but didn't wake. "I don't need promises," Prudence said quietly. "I need truth, even when it's hard." Silas reached for her hand. "Then take this. I'll stand beside you as long as you'll have me." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, rested her head against his chest, and let her eyes close. His arms came around her, slow and sure. The kind of hold that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. When the snow stopped that night, the moon rose crisp and full, casting silver across the land. The 3 of them slept under one roof, the wind stilled, and for the first time since being turned out from the only home she'd known, Prudence dreamed without dread. Morning broke pale and quiet, and outside, deer tracks crossed the yard in neat pairs. By late October, the trees along the creek ran gold and bare, and frost clung to the cabin's window panes in delicate ribs. Prudence wrapped Florence in a quilt before stepping outside each morning, her boots crunching over brittle grass as she crossed to the root cellar. The air had turned sharp enough to sting the lungs, but there was rhythm now to each day, quiet, steady, and hers. The coop Silas had built stood firm behind the lean-to, and 5 hens scratched at the dirt with calm purpose. Prudence fed them before sunrise, her breath visible in the dim light, her fingers red from cold. She'd taken to writing letters in the evenings, not to send, but to keep. Pages folded into the bottom of a cedar box, thoughts she didn't always want to speak aloud. She never reread them. One morning, while Florence napped and the stew simmered low on the stove, Silas returned from the eastern ridge with a wrapped parcel under one arm. "You cut across the flats?" Prudence asked, wiping her hands. He set the package gently on the table. "Rode to town. Co-opman's wife had this waiting for you." She untied the string. Inside lay a wool dress in deep russet, thick but soft, with a row of glass buttons shaped like berries. She ran her palm over the fabric, careful with the stitching. "I didn't order this. Ruth Coopman said she owed you," Silas said, unlacing his boots. "Said you helped her sister last spring when her baby was born early. I just sent herbs and told her how to steep them. You showed up," he said, sitting. "That counts more than anything." Prudence folded the dress over her arm. "Tell her I'd like to repay her. She won't take it." Florence stirred in the next room, murmuring in sleep. Prudence set the dress aside and looked at Silas. "You don't have to keep doing this." He raised his eyes. "Doing what?" "Making things easier for me." "I'm not easing your way," he said. "I'm walking in it with you." She leaned against the table, her voice low. "It matters to me that I can still hold my own. You don't have to stop being strong just because you're safe now." Prudence felt something shift in her chest, not sudden, but like ice releasing under spring sun. "Sometimes I forget I am." He stood, crossing the room with quiet steps. "Then let me remind you." She didn't move when he took her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from the axe and the reins, and his thumb brushed once across the back of her knuckles. He didn't pull her in. She went to him. That night, after Florence had fallen back asleep from a bad dream, Prudence returned to the main room to find Silas by the hearth, carving a thin strip of ash. He looked up as she approached but didn't speak. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting beside him, "that I'd like to have the Coopmans over before the ground freezes. Maybe Ruth and the boys. They'd be glad for it," he said. "I can help smoke the meat." She tilted her head. "You planning on staying through winter?" He looked at her then, serious in that quiet way of his. "I wasn't going to leave," she swallowed. "Not just for the season." "No," he said. "Not just for that." Silas reached into his coat pocket and brought out a ring made of 2 twisted bands of copper, the metal dulled with age. "My mother gave this to my father when they married. It's not gold, but it's held." Prudence stared at it, her breath caught. "You've carried it all this time. It was the only piece I took after she passed." He held it out. "I wanted to go to someone who's walked through fire and come out whole." Her eyes blurred, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." She took the ring, her fingers trembling, and slipped it on. It fit without force. Silas leaned in, his forehead touching hers as he whispered, "We'll raise her together, build this into something lasting." "I want that," she said, voice thick. "I want all of it." They married in early November, beneath the cottonwoods where the last of the yellow leaves clung to the branches. Ruth Coopman brought warm bread, and her husband whittled a cradle that rocked without a sound. Florence toddled between them, trailing ribbons, her cheeks pink from the cold. That night, Silas carried Prudence over the threshold, not out of ceremony, but because he wanted to. She laughed, her arms around his neck, the fire already lit behind them. He set her down gently, and she pulled him close, the copper ring warm between their joined hands. No one called her ruined anymore. No one dared. She was a wife now, a mother, a woman who had built her life up from ash, and Silas was no longer a man afraid of grief. He had found his home, not in a place, but in the way Prudence held his gaze and didn't look away. Years passed. The cabin grew. A second child was born in spring, a son with his father's quiet eyes. The Coopmans moved closer, and the children ran between houses barefoot and laughing. Prudence taught Florence to read under the cottonwoods, and Silas planted a row of plum trees down by the creek. They never left that land. They didn't need to. They had already arrived.